So as far as my family is concerned, we're coming to the deadline. Or live line, I guess, in this case. But I will say this, McDaniel boys tend to come on Sundays. So if I just step aside and let Andy take over the sermon, just know that the lesson is about do not take out retribution. That's the end of the lesson there. But we are going to be looking at, of course, in Matthew chapter 5, this idea of an eye for an eye. And as I said last week, I wanted to take some time to, in a way, really almost vindicate this passage. Because in this passage, many people have taken this particular verse and how Jesus explains a counter to it, and not really a counter to it, but instead a counter to the Pharisees. It makes some people believe that Jesus is actually saying that the law of Moses was worthless. Because when you look at this passage and it says this, I'm going to say what the impression that some people get is after, but it says this. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 38, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you." What some people believe that this passage of the Old Testament is saying, and we can thank Jesus in their minds, we can thank Jesus for freeing us from this oppressive law, was if someone takes your eye, then you have every right to take their eye back from them. That's how people read this passage. And what I want us to see this morning is that is exactly the opposite of what God intended with this verse. Where Jesus is quoting from, Jesus is actually saying your interpretation is wrong, and here is what it actually means. And that's why some people have taken the entire Sermon on the Mount and they've said that Jesus is actually freeing us from the oppression of the old law, and now he is bringing something entirely different and new. And it a lot comes down to this particular passage. But that's not what Jesus is doing. He is not freeing us from the oppression of the law. He is freeing us from our wrongful sinning against the law. So let's look at this idea. Some people look at this and they say that this is just a twisted law. This eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. They hear that and they say, boy, yeah, it's twisted. We've grown up from this ancient corruption. Look over in Leviticus chapter 24. Leviticus 24 and verse 19. Leviticus 24 and verse 19. This is one of the passages that uses this phrase, of several passages that use this phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And Leviticus chapter 24 and verse 19, it says, "If a man injures his neighbor, just as he has done, so it shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Just as he has injured a man, so it shall be inflicted on him. Thus, the one who kills an animal shall make it good, but the one who kills a man shall be put to death. There shall be one standard for you. It shall be for the stranger as well as the native, for I am the Lord your God." Then Moses spoke to the sons of Israel, and they brought the one who had cursed, that is, he spoke blasphemous, that he had cursed outside the camp, and stoned him with stones. Thus the sons of Israel did, just as the Lord commanded Moses. And they look at this and they think, wow, how barbaric that this ancient religion was. And Jesus finally comes and rebukes this false law. That's how a lot of people think about this. But what I want us to see, because when we look at this passage, we can maybe understand the idea of if you take someone's life, it is just and right for your life to be taken as well. And we can understand if someone steals your cow or kills your cow, you're going to have to pay the full price for that, if not more, for the compensation that would have been lost. We can understand that because we have Judge Judy and we understand all of those kind of things concerning law courts and those type of ideas. But boy, I mean, a guy just said something wrong about God and he gets stoned? I mean, a guy takes your eye and you get to take his eye back? Isn't that retribution? Personal retribution? It is retribution, but it's not personal retribution. Because we see this command of God, and what many people think is that it is unjust for one or both of two reasons. The first reason that they think that it is unjust is because we think in our culture that punishment for wrongdoing is wrong in and of itself. And so if you spank your kids or even give any sort of punishment, even time out is coming into question anymore. If you give any type of punishment to your kids, that's wrong. And now we have a culture that questions punishments for even criminals, at least as far as the death penalty is concerned. But even when they're in prison, sometimes they have more cushy lives than we do. And so we are eliminating in our culture the idea of punishment. When we think of punishment, we think of the one who is inflicting it is in the wrong. That's the first reason. The second reason is because we actually sometimes agree with the Pharisees' interpretation of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We think that that phrase means that if you take my hand, then I have every right to take it from you. And so we think of this law as being kind of harsh. But I want us to see this morning that this law was actually intended to teach just the opposite. It was actually intended to teach that we are not to take personal vindication for ourselves. This law was actually to protect against personal vengeance in two ways. First, it took justice out of my hands and handed it to another. And who it handed it to was the court system. This was not a statement for what you get to do. This was a statement of what the courts were allowed to do in Israel. So even up unto the Sanhedrin, they followed this principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, if they were convicted properly concerning what you thought was taken from you. That then they could inflict this punishment of retribution, of paying back what you took. So that's the first reason. It took vengeance out of our hands and gave vengeance to someone else. And the second reason is you could not demand more than the damage that was inflicted against you. So whenever someone might take my hand, I don't get to get back at them by taking their life. So it was only up unto, if that's what the courts decided, it was only up unto what was taken from you that could be taken from the perpetrator. So can you start to see how this was not intended as a law that said, you get to have yours? This was something that the courts were instructed concerning in the days of Israel. Because what we want is to say, vengeance is mine. That's what we want. When someone does something against us, we want vengeance. Look over in Proverbs 24. Proverbs 24. And we'll look at verse 29. Proverbs 24 and verse 29. It says here, do not say, because here's what we want to say. He says, do not say, thus I shall do to him as he has done to me. I will render to the man according to his work. And I think we can sympathize with that. We can relate, at least, I should say. We can relate to that mentality when something wrong is done to us, or something wrong is done to our family. For instance, one of the passages that uses the phrase eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and maybe this is the wrong week for this illustration, but in Exodus chapter 21 and verse 22. Exodus 21 and verse 22. It says there, if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child, again, maybe the wrong week, but strike a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet there is no injury, he shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judges decide. But if there is any further injury, whether it be, I believe, to the woman or to the child, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. You better believe that if someone's stupid, negligent violence caused my little Dallas to be born before he ought to have been, you better believe that I'm having a fire in my belly. And I'm wanting there to be justice done. That's what our spirits want when that takes place. And God says, it's not your place. It's the place of the eye for the eye courts to make those determinations. We want vengeance, though. We want people to be held to account. And God says they will be. And notice this, in the Old Testament, they were even held liable even to what you wanted to do to someone else. Over in Deuteronomy 19 and verse 16. Deuteronomy 19 and verse 16. It says, if a malicious witness, or a false witness, but here it states even further, a malicious witness rises up against a man to accuse him of wrongdoing, then both the men who have the dispute shall stand before the Lord. And that's how it's talking about the court system. This is not standing before just humans. This is standing before God himself. They are standing before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who will be in office in those days. The judges shall investigate thoroughly, and if the witness is a false witness and he has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him just as he intended to do to his brother. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. And the rest will hear and be afraid, and will never again do such an evil thing among you. Thus you shall not show pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. This false witness, this malicious witness, wanted wrong to be done to this person. Maybe he had done something to him earlier that was of a lesser caliber. I don't know the situation exactly. He's saying a general principle here, that if you want harm to be done to them, maybe he lied and he said, he struck me, and when he struck me, I lost sight in both my eyes. I cannot see anymore. And they tested and they found out, you're a liar. You can see just fine. Well, what the courts were allowed to do was to take blindness, to take the eyes of the one who accused the person whenever there was no wrongdoing that had been done. So you were even held accountable for what you wanted to do to someone else. And that's important as we come to Jesus' statements as well. We want vengeance, but it's not ours. It's God's. That only belongs to God. Romans chapter 12 talks about this, of course. Romans chapter 12, if you want to look over there, but we're going to come back to the book of Proverbs in just a moment. In Romans chapter 12 and in verse 18. Romans 12 and verse 18. It says, if possible, so far as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Never take your own vengeance or your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. He's the one that gets vengeance. He's the one that it belongs to. That when you look in the book of Proverbs in chapter 20, Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 22, you see that this is what it calls us to. It calls us to wait on the Lord because He's the one that is going to take vengeance. He is going to right all wrongs. In Proverbs 20 and verse 22, it says, do not say, I will repay evil. Wait for the Lord, and He will save you. This is God's job. He's the one that gets to do these things that even the angels of heaven would not. It says in Jude, verse 9, that when there was an argument about the body of Moses between Michael the archangel and Satan himself, that even Michael the archangel would not take vengeance on Satan concerning this, but instead he said, the Lord rebuke you. Even the angels of heaven will not take vengeance into their own hands. They leave room for the wrath of God. And it is right for God to take vengeance. And the reason why is because He's God. Let's look at a couple of verses here in Deuteronomy to address that idea. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, Deuteronomy 32 and verse 35. Deuteronomy 32 and verse 35. It says, vengeance is mine and retribution. In due time their foot will slip. For the day of their calamity is near, and the impending things are hastening upon them. Now drop down to verse 39. See now that I am He, and there is no God besides me. It is I who put to death and give life. I have wounded, and it is I who heal, and there is no one who can deliver from my hand. Why? Because He's God. And that may feel like a cop-out answer, except He gives the explanation. He says, I am God. I am the one who gave life. So it is entirely in my right to take life away. I am the one who healed you. So it is entirely in my right to bring you to calamity, to destroy you. He has that right because He is the one that gave the gift in the first place. He's God. So He is the only one who is qualified to take vengeance into His own hands. And He is even allowed to use humans as instruments and tools for that vengeance to be done. Now He could strike us down like Achan. Whenever Achan sinned against God, he could just immediately strike us down when we do wrong. But He has the right to take His creation that He made for His purposes and for His good and for His will. He is allowed to use those creations to bring about His vengeance that belongs to Him. You see a perfect example with the nation of Israel. That all of the Canaanites had been sinning so heinously against God that they deserved to die. And God used the instrument of Israel in order to take care of that problem. You see it as well with the government. In Romans chapter 13, right after our passage, it says, you don't take revenge, but leave it to the wrath of God. Immediately after that, it says in verse 1 of chapter 13, every person is to be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those who exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister. They are instruments of God. They are a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing, for it is the minister of God. When the government strikes down condemnation on people rightly, what we find is that is not them taking vengeance. That is God taking vengeance. He is using them for his purpose. So we are commanded, submit to them. You don't take revenge. Let the government take care of those things. Or even in the Old Testament, let the courts take care of those things. You don't worry about revenge. You worry about being at peace with one another. Vengeance is God's. I want you to consider David and Saul. David and Saul in 1 Samuel. In 1 Samuel chapter 24, this is actually the first of two occurrences where David has spared the life of Saul. And in 1 Samuel chapter 24 and verse 9, David says this. It says, "Now afterward David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul," this is verse 8, saying, "My lord, the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. David said to Saul, 'Why do you listen to the words of men saying, behold, David seeks to harm you? Behold, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord had given you today into my hand in the cave, and some said to kill you, but my eye had pity on you. And I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Now my father, see. Indeed, see the edge of your robe in my hand.'" And he holds it up. "For in that I cut off the edge of your robe and did not kill you. Know and perceive that there is no evil or rebellion in my hands. And I have not sinned against you, though you are lying in wait for my life to take it. May the Lord judge between you and me." And that's exactly what God does. In chapter 31, God brings vengeance against Saul's life for all of the sins that he did, but also for the sins of pursuing and trying to kill the anointed one, David. And he does it not by the hand of David, but by the hand of the Philistines. But this attitude that David has here, I am not going to stretch out my hands. That's not my job. That's the Lord's job. I am not going to do such and sin against you, especially you who are God's anointed. That attitude is the same attitude that stemmed out of the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth teachings of the law of Moses. Which means that when we come to Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, we come to Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, he is not changing a thing. He is always calling us out of exactly what David understood about the law. It's not my job to take vengeance. I'll leave that into God's hands. And so the question that always comes up, of course, with this particular passage is, well, does that mean that we can't stand up for ourselves? Do we basically have to be pushovers as Christians? Because we might think that this is kind of a twisted answer to a twisted law. Do we have no sort of recourse that we can take? Because you look at this passage and Jesus says some pretty strong statements here. He smacks you, don't smack him back. Now to understand, this likely wasn't even a punch to the face. And here's why we can know that. Because nearly everyone in that time period was right-handed. And it says if he slaps you on the right cheek. Now either you could go in the opposite direction, but if you're going to smack someone with your right hand, that's going to land on your left cheek. So there's something going on here that's different. No, instead, what you're probably doing is you're pulling a punch to the left cheek instead. But he says if he smacks you on the right, and I think we can kind of see what Jesus is talking about when we visualize it then. When someone smacks you on the right cheek with his right hand, especially in that day, this was one of the deepest insults that you could give to someone. It would be like spitting in their face. And Jesus says, if someone gives you that dishonor and disrespect, if someone shames you to insult you in this way, he says, give to him the other cheek too. That seems pretty strong of a statement. And then you look at the next one, and it talks about if someone tries to sue you for your shirt, is how my translation puts it, then give to him your coat also. And the idea here is actually that this person is illegally, because Exodus chapter 22 says that they were not allowed to sue for this particular article of clothing because this is all that he had to cover with in the middle of the night when it gets cold. And so he's actually doing something illegal here, and Jesus still says, if someone tries to take the shirt that's off your back, give to him your coat too. That you have nothing left. It seems a little strong language. Or when it talks about if someone compels you to go 1 mile, the only other time that this word is used is when Jesus is being crucified, and the Roman authorities forced or compelled Simon to take up the cross of Jesus and carry it to where it was going to be placed. That's the only other time it's used in the New Testament, but it was actually a pretty technical term in this day that it talked about if someone compels you to go 1 mile. That meant that the Roman authorities actually had the full right, according to the law, they had the full right to tell you, whether you were working or not, hey, I'm wearing this 70 to 80 pound bag on my back, and I am now compelling you by law to take this bag and go 1 mile. Now, they were only allowed to force 1 mile, but they were allowed to force 1 mile. I think we would think of that as a pretty oppressive law. And Jesus yet still says, go with him another mile. Go with him the 2nd mile. And of course, this would almost be a libertarian's nightmare, to say that the government is telling you to do something that you don't want to do, and Jesus says, go ahead and do a little bit more of that. That, boy, I mean, let's go ahead and we're getting killed on taxes, right? We're getting 50% tax, let's say. Go ahead and give them another 10. That's how this language is being presented here. And then it says that if someone wants to borrow from you, you give it to him? But when you look at passages like Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 7 through 11, this was a very honored thing to give to the poor. But then we're thinking about every single time? Every single time, is that what I have to do? Do I have no legal recourse in this life because of what Jesus is saying in this passage? I want you to remember the context that this eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth law was for. It was not for you to take the eye. It was for the courts to take the eye. It is actually embedded in the law that the courts are going to be a part of this. So yes, you do have legal recourse. The eye for the eye and a tooth for a tooth is actually telling you that you have legal recourse in order to, if someone does something wrong, that it costs you something, you have the legal right, even according to the old law, and Jesus is bringing that in. He's not trying to go against the old law. He is actually elevating and fulfilling the law. So yes, we do have legal recourse. It's not just every single time someone does something wrong against us, we just got to bend over backwards. Now, you can't take this out with your own fists, as it were, but you have a right to plead from the courts for justice. But we do need to be careful with this. Because in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, let's go ahead and look over there. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 6. 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 6. We've looked at this recently in our study of 1 Corinthians. It says in verse 6, that's chapter 4. In chapter 6 and verse 6, but brother goes to law with brother, and he's talking about Christians. Brother goes to law with brother, and that before unbelievers? Actually then, it is already a defeat for you that you have lawsuits with one another. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be defrauded? The point that I made on this particular verse, whenever we were talking about this in our 1 Corinthians class, was this. If you do something that cost me even $10,000, you're still my brother. You're still my sister. Would I not be willing to even give you $10,000 if that's what was necessary? So we do need to be careful, because you go back to verse 1. Does any one of you, when he has a case against his neighbor, dare to go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? If the world is judged by you, are you not competent to constitute the smallest law courts? He's saying, he's saying to Corinth, are you all so dumb that you can't figure out legal matters on your own? That if someone actually does cost this person $10,000, yes, you can take the route of being defrauded, but you can also take the route of this person has wronged me and take it to the elders and say, this person's wronged me. Can you help us work this out? And the elders or the congregation or people within the congregation, he says, you ought to be spiritually minded enough and logically minded enough to say, yeah, that was wrong, and you need to give him back $10,000. So we need to be careful, but that doesn't mean we have no ability to have any amount of recourse whatsoever. Well, what about personal assets? Do I have no right to those? I got to give all my clothes away? I got to give all of my money away whenever someone asks it of me? Is that what this is talking about? Well, we also have to balance that with passages like 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8. It says, if a man does not provide for his own household, he's worse than an unbeliever. If he does not provide for his home, if he gives away so much of his money, because every time he is asked by every charity, every time that the St. Jude's little thing comes up on the ticket at the end of a restaurant, that every time you have to give away money, that's not what he's talking about. Because if you are giving away all of your money that you can't feed your own children, you're worse than an unbeliever. Or we have the passage in 2 Thessalonians where he's actually talking to the Christians in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 10. And it says there that if a man will not work, neither will he eat. And he's talking to Christians. He is saying you need to understand this. Not as a statement of just a general principle that if a man doesn't work, then it's just going to naturally be the case that he's not going to work, that he's not going to eat either. No, he's telling the Christians, stop enabling him. Stop giving him food whenever he's not putting in any work behind it. No, we can't enable people every single time that we are asked. So there's a balance here as well. And the one that always comes up is there no ability to have personal defense or self-defense? Is there no ability to do this? But remember, Jesus is bringing this out of the law of Moses. We're in Exodus chapter 22 and verse 2. And actually, let's go ahead and look over there. Because the wording there is such that I think that it's important for us to take a look. In Exodus 22 and verse 2, here's what the law of Moses, which was embedded with the eye and the eye principle. In Exodus 22 and verse 2, it says, if the thief is caught while breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guilt on his account. So there is language even in the Old Testament that shows that just because we can't take vengeance ourselves does not mean that if someone comes into your home, that you have no right whatsoever to defend your family and defend your home. Your own life especially. Your own life and the life of those who are innocent. He's giving language here that does lend itself toward that. So Jesus is not trying to negate those ideas of the Old Covenant. He believed, just like Paul, that the law was perfect and cannot be broken. So this is not to be taken as a flatly literal reading that Jesus is giving here. Some people have taken that way. They've taken it to an extreme that says that we cannot take any sort of recourse whatsoever. We cannot defend in any way whatsoever. We often will call them pacifists. And I've never taken that position. I will say that there is some things that we have to grapple with even when trying to deal with their arguments. But some people have taken a flatly literal approach to this passage. And it's not flatly literal as much as Jesus saying that if your eye causes you to sin, cut it out and cast it from you. It is not a flatly literal idea. It is serious, though. And that's the difference. Even though Jesus is giving some very strong language, the strength of the language ought to encourage us to say, this is serious, and I need to be careful whenever I want the wrongdoing to be taken care of myself. I have to be careful. It's serious. But we need to also be careful about saying that there is never a time for us to stand up for what's right. And I think that that's most clear whenever he says here in this passage, if you took it literally, it would actually say, do not resist evil. That's a proper translation of this passage. Do not resist evil. Do not resist evil. Can we say that we can defend that in the scriptures? Of course not. Of course not. And so when we look at this, we think of passages like Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 11, which says very plainly, we need to stand up against evil. In Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 11, it says, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. For it is disgraceful even to speak of the things which are done by them in secret. No, we need to resist evil. Resist evil in ourselves, even resist evil in others. The same word is used concerning Paul whenever he was going against Peter. Peter was doing wrong, and it says, I resisted him to his face. We need to resist evil. And so some translations, really all translations, have then taken this in Matthew chapter 5, and they said what it should be translated as is, do not resist the evil person, or do not resist the evil one. And some people take that as Satan even. But if we were to take a strictly literal approach to that idea of do not resist the evil one, well, Ephesians also has something to say about that idea also. In Ephesians chapter 6 in verse 11, it says, put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God so that you will be able to resist in the evil day. And having done everything, to stand firm. I think that this particular phrase helps us to understand that yes, Jesus is being serious, but that doesn't mean that we can never stand up for what's right. Because we can go too far, and we can take a peaceable approach that we allow wrongdoing to go unchecked, almost a live and let live kind of idea. And when we take that approach, we are missing what Jesus is actually trying to attack. He's not trying to attack never being able to stand up for what's right. Instead, he is fighting the other extreme that says, I have a right always. And where does that kind of an attitude stem from? It stems from the anger that he talked about earlier in chapter 5, and it stems from the hate that we're going to talk about this evening. If that is your heart, if you have that type of bitterness, Jesus says it's time to let it go completely. Let someone else take care of it. Especially let God take care of all that. Because he's going to. He cares about you, and he doesn't want to see you crumble. He doesn't want to see you hurt. But he also doesn't want to see you have so much anger that it hurts your soul. Let it go. Be defrauded. Be wronged. If it means that you are letting go of all of that anxious, bitter anger. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I believe we've seen this morning it means just the opposite of what people thought it meant. Because this is not trying to encourage personal retribution. It's saying it's time for you to let it go and give it to the Lord. Perhaps there are some here who have difficulty with bitterness, difficulty with anger, difficulty with wanting retribution for every little thing. Vengeance is God's. He will repay. And that's a statement of hope for us. He will repay. We may suffer in this world, but he will repay. He will bring about retribution. He will bring about wrath so that we can say that entirely we have been saved, even by the wrath of God. We have been saved out of all of the wrongdoing that has ever been done against us. It's going to come one day. Just wait. God's going to take care of it. And that day that's coming is the day that we long for every single day. Lord, come. Let this all be done. Lord, come. But if there is anyone who is not ready for the day, because you have not been converted in the waters of baptism for the forgiveness of your sins, let today be the day of your salvation. If there is any repentance that is needed in this building right now, let God know so that he can take care not only of the wrongdoing, but the wrongdoing in you. If there is any need that you have, please come to the front while we stand and sing.